Hello everyone, welcome to Artistic Atom channel. I'm Fatima and today we will be discussing a task sheet based on the scientific research method. This is our session part 2. Now here is the first question based on the concept that we have discussed in the previous session. So as you can see, this question is saying, I can describe the steps of the scientific research method. So what is the step 1 and step 2? So as we discussed in the previous session that whenever we start with the scientific method, we always starts with a question. But in order to get a question or a problem, we always has to observe the things in our surrounding. Okay, so our first step is the observation and the second step is framing a question or a problem. Now, the next question is the question that we will be framing must be option A is testable, option B is untestable. Now, let us understand what is the meaning of testable or untestable question. So, testable question means such a question for which we can design an experiment and also we can gather evidences in order to get a proper answer, justified answer for that particular question or a problem. So, this means that whenever we are framing a question, it has to be in a way that we will be able to design an experiment and also we will be able to get data or the information from different resources so that we can move ahead in carrying out an experimentation in order to prove that particular question. So this means the question must be always testable. So in conclusion, we can say that if the question is based on opinions or the personal preferences, then such questions cannot be tested and we will not be able to carry out the scientific research method further. Now, the next question is read the research questions below. If the question can be tested through an experiment, circle yes. If it cannot be tested, then circle no. So, the first question for this is as follows. Does the type of soil affects how well seeds germinate? Well, this particular question can be tested by performing an experimentation. Also, we will be able to get the data in previous research or the review papers. Now, how we will be conducting this experiment? Well, for this experiment, we will be taking different pots in which we will be putting different types of soil and we will be taking the same plant. Now, keeping these particular conditions, we will be able to conduct this experiment. So hence we can say that yes, this question can be tested. And here is the reason why. Because you can plant seeds in different soils and count how many sprouts. Okay. Now the next question is, are unicorns real? Well, this question is completely imaginary because unicorns are not found in nature. Hence, we cannot test it scientifically. Therefore, the answer is no, that this question cannot be tested. Now, the next question is, does the amount of air in the balloon affect how high it bounces when dropped? Well, for this particular question, the answer is yes. We can test this question because we can perform an experiment or also get the data from the different resources based on this, where we have to take balloons with a different amount of air and we can measure the height, how high it is going to bounce. So these are the type of questions which from which you will be able to figure out which questions you will be able to take it further and which ones not. So make sure that whenever you're framing a question based on any observation, it has to be testable. That is, it should be based on practical thing. Like we will be able to conduct an experiment, get the data, or also be able to prove that particular question. Okay. So it has to be testable. Now, the next question is answer the question below. So, here is the question. A variable is. So, what do you mean by the term variable? As we have discussed in our previous session, that variable is nothing but a factor that we can change in an experiment or it can change it by ourselves. Okay. So, sometimes we keep few variables constant. Sometimes we change few variables in an experiment depending upon the need. So here is the definition by which you can describe what do you understand by the term variable. Okay. Now, the next question is fill in the blanks. So here there are a few blank questions given and we have to put the right words into those blanks. So the first question is there are dash type of variables in an experiment. So as we have discussed in our previous session, this was the acronym that we should know very well so that we will be able to determine the variables in an experiment along with where we are supposed to plot them in a graph. So as you can see, we have discussed about three variables. So first one was the independent variable, second one was the dependent variable, and third one was the controlled variable. So we have discussed all three variables in our previous session. Now, what do you understand by this term IV? IV stands for independent variable. Now, this independent variable can slash cannot be changed by the experimenter. So for this particular question, you can refer to the trick that we have learned. So independent variable is nothing but the factors that you are manipulating. This means whatever you are changing in an experiment. So you are the experimenter and you can change the factors involved for independent variable. This means we can change the factors. Okay. Now the next term is dv. Dv stands for dependent variable and this factor can slash cannot be affected as a result of changing dash. So this means for this particular question, we can also refer to the same trick. So what we have learned in the previous session that whenever the factor we are manipulating, that factor is called as the independent variable. And because of this change in independent variable, there is a kind of response or some or the other factor changes in the experiment. So that response is called as a dependent variable. This means dependent variables can be changed in an experiment as a result of change in the independent variable. So this trick is very useful. So do remember this trick. Now the next question is CV stands for Now CV stands for controlled variable. This factor can slash cannot be kept the same while performing the experiment. So if we go back to the trick that we have learned, so we know that CC is nothing but the controlled variable. Okay. So whatever you're keeping constant that is same is nothing but your control variable. So we can actually control this particular factor. Now the next was the controlled environment. It is nothing but the surrounding conditions that we have kept same. Okay, so remember these terms and these are the questions that you might expect in your exam, like these kind of questions. Okay, now the next question is determine the IV, that is independent variable and dependent variable for each of the following research question and suggest at least two constant variables for each. So here is the first question. Does the amount of sunlight affect the growth of a plant? So this is what was the question that we have got after having observations from the surrounding. So as we can see in the figure as well, that when plants are kept in a huge amount of sunlight, they grow really well. Whereas if suppose due to some or the other reason, they are not able to get in contact with the sunlight, their growth will surely affect. Now, this is what was our prior information or the prior knowledge that we had about the question. Now, from this particular question, we will be able to determine the independent variable. So what we were manipulating. So the amount of sunlight that actually plant was exposed to, we were changing it. Like in this particular picture, we have provided the plant with a full amount of sunlight. Whereas here, the amount of sunlight that this plant was getting is quite less than that of the first one. So this means we are manipulating the amount of sunlight. Now, as we are manipulating the amount of sunlight, what was the response? The growth of the plant was different that we have observed. So this means that the response is nothing but the growth of plant. So this factor is dependent variable. Now, what are the control variables? So whatever are the factors that you're keeping in this particular experiment same are called as the control variable or the constant variables. So here what we will be keeping same amount of water, type of plant used. Also we can keep the pot size, salt type that we are using, and also the temperature. So these are the conditions that we can keep same when we are carrying out this particular experimentation. So this is how you will be able to use that particular trick that we have learned in the previous session and can apply it to such questions to determine the independent variable, dependent variable, and controlled variable. Now the next question is this. So here what we are doing, here we are actually carrying out an experiment based on the amount of sugar dissolves versus the temperature. So now it all starts with one day when I was making a lemonade. So what I did exactly was I took two glasses, and in one glass I have added cold water. When I was pouring the second glass, the whole cold water was used up. So I have taken some water from the electric kettle. So that particular water was warm. So when I have added sugar in order to make lemonade, I have observed something that in first glass where there was warm water, the sugar particles has started dissolving very quickly, whereas in case of cold water, it was reverse. So this was my observations that I had, that the glass with hot water shows fewer sugar particles, while the glass with the colder water shows more sugar particles. Now, this observation actually sparked a question in my mind. That particular question was, does the temperature of water, temperature means whether the hot or the cold or whatever is the temperature of that particular water, does it really affects the amount of sugar or how fast the sugar dissolves? So this was the question that I have come up with. Then after this particular question, the next step that I followed was research. So in research, I was trying to find out a lot more information about this particular phenomenon that I have observed. So I was going through a lot of books, research papers, and also some magazines, science magazines, and different things. From those particular resources, I have come to this conclusion that warm water usually causes particles to move faster, because these sugar particles, they gain energy when heat is supplied. So as soon as they gain energy, these particles, they move faster, and as soon as they move faster, that particular kinetic energy helps the substance to dissolve faster, because those sugar particles will go and fit into the intermolecular spaces of the water particle. And this whole phenomenon of the solute particles going and fitting into the intermolecular spaces is called as dissolving. So I have observed and also researched about this concept, and this is what was the conclusion I have got. Then after that, the next step that I followed was hypothesis. So in hypothesis, I was framing a question. What could be? I was framing a statement with respect to what could be the tentative answer for the question that I was having at the beginning. So I have framed it with the statement starting with, I think if. So the statement was as follows. I think if the temperature of the water is increased, then the sugar will dissolve faster, because the particles will gain energy, they will move faster, quickly fit into the intermolecular spaces of the solvent, and quickly dissolve. So this is what the hypothesis I have got. Now, after hypothesis, the next step is to test the hypothesis, whether whatever I am thinking at that particular point is absolutely correct, or is there any other explanation. So in order to conduct an experiment, I have to decide the variables, that is control variable, independent variable, and dependent variable. So in order to determine these three variables, I'm going to use the same trick that we have learned in the previous session. So in an experiment, whatever I am manipulating is called as independent variable. So I'm going to manipulate the temperature, as I have told you or explained you before in the before slide. Okay, so I'm manipulating the temperature. So when I am manipulating the temperature, what was the response? The response was that the sugar was dissolving faster. This means the sugar is taking less time to dissolve when the temperature is high. So the response is the time taken for the sugar to dissolve. So this is nothing but my dependent variable. So this was the factor which was the response as a result of change in the temperature. So whatever is the response is the factor that I'm going to measure in the experiment, and it is called as what? Dependent variable. Now the other factors that I'm keeping same in the experiment are called as control variables. So what all things I'm going to keep same: amount of sugar that I'm going to take in both the glass, amount of water, number of stars, and also the size of glass. So these are the factors that I'm going to keep same in the experiment. Now, after performing an experimentation, the next step is analysis. So this is what the data I have got after performing that particular experiment. So I can see in this data that as I was increasing the temperature, the time required for the sugar particle to dissolve was decreasing as I was expecting at the beginning. Now, here is a question for you. So, the question was that I have to refer to this particular experimental data, and I have to decide which variable will be placed on x-axis and which variable will be placed on y-axis. So, in order to determine this, that which factor will go on which axis, I'm going to use the same trick, dynamic CC. So I know that whatever is the manipulation is my independent variable, and this variable will always go on x-axis. Whereas whatever was the response, that was the time taken. So that is called as the dependent variable, and it will always go on y-axis. So following this trick, here is how my graph will look like. That is, I've plotted time on y-axis and the temperature of water on x-axis. So this is the graph that I'm going to end up after performing an experiment. So after analysis, it's time to conclude everything. So the conclusion that I've got was this, that when I increase the temperature, due to the increase in temperature, the particles of solute gains more energy and they start to move faster. As they move faster, they go and easily fit into the intermolecular spaces of the solvent and easily dissolve. So this is what was the conclusion I have got after performing the experimentation. And I have understood that whatever was the hypothesis that I made at the beginning was absolutely correct. So in conclusion, we can say that increasing temperature increases the rate of dissolving. What do you mean by the term rate? Rate is nothing but the speed with which the sugar dissolves. So we use the term rate in chemistry to, describe the term speed of any reaction. Now, the next step is verification. So what do you mean by verification? So we can actually repeat the experiment to check the validity or and accuracy of our results. Whether this particular experiment is performed by someone else, will it give the same results or not? This is what is called as the validity. Let's move ahead. So the next question is, you have to list all the steps involved in the scientific method. So this is what we have discussed in the previous session, that the first step is always going to be the observation. That is, whatever you are actually observing in the surrounding, your experiences, everything is going to give you the observations. Okay, after these observation, whatever is the question or the problem that you have observed, and you're going to frame it in a way that it has to be testable. So this is the next step. Okay, now after framing a proper testable question, you're going to move ahead and follow the step of research, where you will start gathering the data. After you have gathered the data, you're going to frame your hypothesis, starting with this word, I think if. Okay. Now, after framing the hypothesis, you're going to perform an experiment to test it, whether the hypothesis that you have framed is true or not. After the experimentation, you're going to analyze the data that you have got, and finally, you're going to conclude everything. So, in conclusion, you may find that the hypothesis was true at the beginning. Sometimes it may not, but you will always end up with some or the other kind of learnings. After conclusion, you're going to verify everything by repeating the experiment 2 or 3 times. So, in order to check the validity. So, these are the steps that we have learned in this session, also in previous session. question and always remember the order. Now, this particular order is not fixed, okay, and it is not strict. So this means if the scientists they find that skipping some or the other step or switching the step gives them the better results, they can do so. Now, here I have put two questions for you. So, what you have to do exactly is for these two research questions, you have to determine the independent variable, dependent variable, and also the controlled variable. And lastly, also frame a hypothesis based on the research that you're going to do based on these two questions. Do comment your answer in the comment section. Do like, share, and subscribe to my channel, Artistic Atoms. See you in the next session.